Your Bibles, if you've got one, to Ephesians chapter 7. Ecclesiastes, not Ephesians. Ecclesiastes chapter 7. And you'll also find it helpful to take out your outline. You'll find it helpful to follow through as we go through this message, as we're in this series called The Meaning of Life. We're studying the book of Ecclesiastes, written by a guy called Solomon. And we're looking this morning about getting the right perspective on life. Let me tell you a parable. Let me tell you a story. Once, there was an old man who lived in a tiny village. Although poor, he was envied by all, for he owned a beautiful white horse. Even the king coveted his treasure. A horse like this had never been seen before. Such was its splendor, its majesty, its strength. People offered fabulous prices for the steed, but the old man always refused. "This horse is not a horse to me," he would tell them. "It is a person. How could you sell a person? He is a friend, not a possession. How could you sell a friend?" The man was poor, and the temptation was great, but he never sold the horse. One morning, he found that the horse was not in the stable. All the village came to him and said, "You old fool," they scoffed. "We told you that someone would steal your horse. We warned you that you would be robbed. You are so poor. How could you ever hope to protect such a valuable animal? It would have been better to have sold him. You could have gotten whatever price you wanted. No amount would have been too high. But now the horse is gone, and you've been cursed with misfortune." The old man responded, "Don't speak too quickly. Say only that the horse is not in the stable. That is all we know. The rest is judgment. If I've been cursed or not, how can you know? How can you judge?" The people contested. "Don't make us out to be fools. We may not be philosophers, but great philosophy is not needed. The simple fact that your horse is gone is a curse." The old man spoke again. "All I know is that the stable is empty and the horse is gone. The rest I don't know. Whether it be a curse or a blessing, I can't say. All we can see is a fragment. Who can say what will come next?" The people of the village laughed. They thought the man was crazy. They had always thought he was a fool. If he wasn't, he would have sold the horse and lived off the money. But instead, he was a poor woodcutter and an old man still cutting firewood and dragging it out of the forest and selling it. He lived hand to mouth in the misery of poverty. Now he had proven that he was indeed a fool. After 15 days, the horse returned. He hadn't been stolen. He had run away into the forest. And not only had he returned, he had brought with him a dozen wild horses. Once again, the village people gathered around the woodcutter and spoke, "Old man, you were right and we were wrong. What we thought was a curse was a blessing. Please forgive us." The man responded, "Once again, you go too far. Say only that the horse is back. State only that a dozen horses returned with him, but don't judge. How do you know if this is a blessing or not? You see only a fragment. Unless you know the whole story, how can you judge? You read only one page of a book. Can you judge the whole book? You read only one word of a phrase. Can you understand the entire phrase? Life is so vast, yet you judge all of life with one page or one word. All you have is a fragment. Don't say that this is a blessing. No one knows. I am content with what I know. I am not perturbed by what I don't know." "Maybe the old man is right," they said to one another. So they said little. But deep down, they knew he was wrong. They knew it was a blessing. 12 wild horses had returned with one horse. With a little bit of work, the animals could be broken and trained and sold for much money. The old man had a son, an only son. The young man began to break the wild horses. After a few days, he fell from one of the horses and broke both legs. Once again, the villagers gathered around the old man and cast their judgments. "You were right," they said. "You proved that you were right. The dozen horses were not a blessing, they were a curse. Your only son has broken his legs, and now in your old age you have no one to help you. Now you are poorer than ever." The old man spoke again. "You people are obsessed with judging. Don't go so far. Say only that my son broke his legs. Who knows if it is a blessing or a curse? No one knows. We only have a fragment. Life comes in fragments. It so happened that a few weeks later, the country engaged in war against a neighbouring country. All the young men in the village were required to join the army. Only the son of the old man was excluded because he was injured. Once again, the people gathered around the old man, crying and screaming because their sons had been taken. There were little chance that they would return. The enemy was strong, and the war would be a losing struggle. They would never see their sons again. "You were right, old man," they wept. "God knows you were right. This proves it. Your son's accident was a blessing. His legs may be broken, but at least he is with you. Our sons are gone forever." The old man spoke again. "It is impossible to talk with you. You always draw conclusions. No one knows. Say only this: your sons had to go to war, and mine did not. No one knows if it is a blessing or a curse. No one is wise enough to know. Only God knows." Now, that story of the woodcutter has really captured for us, I think, the essence of Solomon's words in Ecclesiastes. We've already learned, and we learned this last week, that sometimes crying is better than laughing. Sometimes funerals are better than weddings. Sometimes a man's dying day is better than his birthday. Criticisms can be better than compliments. The long way round is better than the short cut. And today really is better than the good old days. All of these thoughts that seem to turn life upside down and to make us wonder, is this really how life works? How do you make this fit? All of the things which we never thought would be. Well, Solomon is going to teach us a lesson. He's going to teach us the lesson of the woodcutter today. He's going to teach us that in not knowing what we cannot know, there is a great deal of wisdom. Wisdom, you see, is not trying to judge the book by the cover. Wisdom is understanding that you only have but a fragment. Only God has the entire manuscript. How blessed we are if we have the wisdom of the woodcutter and, in fact, better still, the wisdom of Solomon. Because here, in the last half of chapter 7, we discover two gigantic reasons for gratitude. And if we have wisdom, we should be thankful for the perspective of wisdom and for its power in our lives. And so, first of all, in verses 11 through 18, Solomon teaches us that we should, firstly, thank God for the perspective of wisdom. That's the first thing he wants us to understand in the first part of this passage we're looking at, the perspective of wisdom. Wisdom may not solve all of our problems. It may not make all the tough things good, but wisdom gives us understanding of what's going on. It helps us to see things in perspective. And perspective is seeing things in their true size and significance, in their proper relationship to each other. And there are three ways wisdom increases our perspective on the events of life. Firstly, wisdom helps us to deal with prosperity. It helps us to deal with prosperity. Notice what Solomon says in verses 11 and 12. He says, "Wisdom, like an inheritance, is a good thing and benefits those who see the sun. Wisdom is a shelter as money is a shelter, but the advantage of knowledge is this, that wisdom preserves the life of its possessor. It is better, says Solomon, to have wisdom than to have good fortune or a good inheritance. Wisdom, you see, does not depreciate, nor is it subject to inflation. And Solomon says that the person who has wisdom and wealth is in fact doubly blessed. In fact, it becomes his defense. You notice he talks about his shelter. He says that twice over here. Wisdom gives life to those who have it. And that is what Solomon said, in fact, in Proverbs 8, verse 35. He says, "For whoever finds me, that is God, finds life and receives favor from the Lord." So according to Solomon, wisdom is like a shelter to those who have it. It is a greater source of security than money could ever be. You see, rich people who lack wisdom end up miserable. Their wealth becomes a curse instead of a blessing. Wisdom, you see, gives perspective to prosperity. In fact, the NLT puts verses 11 and 12 like this. It says, "Being wise is as good as being rich. In fact, it is better. Wisdom or money can get you almost anything, but it's important to know that only wisdom can save your life." It's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing how very few people there are who both have wealth and wisdom. Have you noticed? A person who is wealthy without wisdom can end up being the most miserable creature on God's green earth. And I've met a few of them. Have you? They have wealth, but they have no wisdom. Wealth has become for them a curse instead of a blessing. And Solomon says that wisdom is something that we should be grateful for because it gives perspective to us. Wisdom should be very valuable to us because wisdom helps us to understand that prosperity is not the end of all things. It's not the end all of everything. That if you have prosperity and you don't have wisdom to enjoy it, you're better off to be poor, he says. Secondly, he says, wisdom helps us to deal with providence. Wisdom helps us to deal with providence. Now, providence is God's supervision of all creation, ensuring that all his plans work out in the way in which he wants them to work out. It means that things will come to pass in our lives only he understands. Notice verses 13 and 14. Consider what God has done. Who can straighten what he has made crooked? When times are good, be happy. But when times are bad, consider. God has made the one as well as the other. Therefore, a man cannot discover anything about his future. Solomon says here that the truth of the matter is that affliction is the appointment of God, and it's the crooked thing we can't fix. Now, we would like to, wouldn't we? To straighten out all the crooked places in our lives. You know, it's wonderful to know, isn't it, that God is with you during those crooked moments, during those sort of, that bend in the road, if you like, that sort of thing. That you would never go there, you'd never need to go there, that sort of thing. You wouldn't want the crooked thing. We don't want that. We don't want adversity in our life. Because Solomon says that that is what the crooked thing is. It is adversity in our life. It is troubles in our life. And the truth of the matter is that affliction is the appointment of God. And the crooked thing that we think needs straightening is the presence of affliction and adversity in our own lives. Walter Kaiser, who was an Old Testament scholar, has paraphrased these verses that we just read. Let me read this paraphrase to you because I think it's helpful. And listen carefully to what he says. He says, "Look with wonder, admire, and silently wait for the results of God's work. The contrasts of life are deliberately allowed by God so that men should ultimately develop a simple trust and dependence in God. For prosperity and the goods from God's hand, be thankful and rejoice. But in adversity and the crookedness of life, think. Reflect on the goodness of God and the comprehensiveness of his plan for men." In other words, it is easy to give thanks to God for the good times, isn't it? But are we as quick to thank him for what we've learned in those crooked places in our lives? You see, wisdom helps us to be consistent in dealing with providence. And what Solomon is teaching us is that we ought to thank God for what we've learned from the troubles that we have had in our lives. Now, Job, one time, when he was going through a loss of everything that he experienced, remember that he lost everything all in a short period of time. He lost his family, his finances, his health, everything he lost. The only thing that was left was his wife. And I have to think that God leaving his wife was the biggest curse he ever got, actually, because she was a real pain. You read the book of Job and you read what she said. I'll show you. See, she was rebuking him one day about all the suffering that he was going through and just telling him what a terrible thing it was and what a really bad thing that God had treated him this way. And Job turns to his wife and he says this in Job 2 verse 10. This is what he says to her. He replied, "You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. What a wise man he was. See, we all rejoice when everything is good in our lives, and understandably, and quite rightly too. But can you learn from God how to be thankful in the midst of the storm, knowing that God is still there? You see, God is never closer to you than he is when you are going through difficulties and troubles and adversity. And I know there are many of you here who could give testimony to that fact this morning. Warren Wiersbe, again, another Bible commentator on Ecclesiastes, he wrote this about wisdom on God's dealing with us. He says, "God balances our lives by giving us enough blessings to keep us happy and enough burdens to keep us humble. If all we had were blessings in our hands, we would fall right over. So the Lord balances the blessings in our hands with burdens on our backs. That helps keep us steady. And as we yield to him, We can even turn burdens into blessings. Now, can you picture that, what he's saying here? What would it be that if God just gave you all blessings all of the time? You'd be bent over and unable to walk, wouldn't you? Because there'd be too many blessings. But God gives you burdens on your back, as it were, to straighten you up. So we need to be thankful for the wisdom God gives you to understand the providence in your life. And Solomon then adds one other thing, and let me paraphrase this. He says, look, don't even think about it all, because you will never figure God out anyway. So don't even try to think about it. Don't worry about it. He knows the future, you don't. So let God be God, and you be you. So wisdom to deal with prosperity, wisdom to deal with providence, and then he adds a third fault in verses 15 to 18. Thirdly, wisdom to deal with the puzzles of life. Wisdom to deal with the puzzles of life. Now, you know, as well as I do, that life is full of puzzles. Every day there is a puzzle of some sort, isn't it? Greater or lesser degree. Things you just can't figure out. Well, Solomon talks about two puzzles, particular puzzles. And the first puzzle that Solomon talks about in verse 15 is the puzzle of reversed rewards. The puzzle of reversed rewards. He says this in verse 15. In this meaningless life of mine, I've seen both of these, a righteous man perishing in his righteousness and a wicked man living long in his wickedness. Now, we've dealt with this one before in this series, so I'm not going to stay here too long. But Solomon says, why do the wicked prosper and why do the righteous suffer? In other words, why do good people suffer and bad people prosper, is what he says. That's what he's asking. He wants us to know that we are only seeing the outside of this puzzle, and therefore we must go beneath the surface of this in order to understand what God is up to. And the fact is, we are never able to do all of that in this life. Listen to what Solomon says in Ecclesiastes 11, verse 5. As you do not know the path of the wind or how the body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. And you don't, do you? We don't. We just can't figure it out. Now, here's my question then. Does that bother you? Does that bother you that you can't figure everything out in life? Now, it depends what sort of person you are. You may be a bit of a control freak, and that really bothers you. I can understand that. But I guess it does for all of us. But I want to suggest that if you really trust God, it shouldn't. Instead, it should make you so excited that we have a God who is so awesome that in our finite wisdom, which is pretty finite, by the way, we can't comprehend God. His ways are higher than our ways, his thoughts than our thoughts. He is the inscrutable God of history, and that's why we worship him. You see, if I could fully understand him, he would be no more of a God than I am. No, he is the God of history. He is the God of providence. He is the God I worship, the God I give gratitude for all that he does, even though I don't always understand it. And we know that God is loving. We know that God cares about his children. And at the same time, we know that God is powerful and he can do anything he wants. But how God's love and power are blended together to create this, we just don't know. And we cannot know, and we cannot understand. Solomon says we just need to accept it. We need to accept God and understand that we cannot know. Remember, do not let what you cannot understand keep you from enjoying what you have from God. Remember the wisdom of the woodcutter? You only see a fragment. Remember what he said? He said, you people are obsessed with judging. Don't go so far. Who knows if it is a blessing or a curse? No one knows. We only have a fragment. Life comes in fragments, says the woodcutter. Well, that's the puzzle of reverse rewards. Now we come, secondly, to the puzzle of righteous rhetoric. Righteous rhetoric. And this is really one of those most difficult passages in the book of Ecclesiastes. There's been a few. Well, here's another tricky one for us. And I would suggest it's the most misinterpreted passage in the entire book, because listen to what Solomon says in verses 16 to 18. And you'll not have to ask me why it's misinterpreted after you hear me read it again. Listen. Do not be over-righteous, neither be over-wise. Why destroy yourself? Do not be over-wicked, and do not be a fool. Why die before your time? It is good to grasp the one and not let go of the other. The man who fears God will avoid all extremes. Now, many liberal scholars will say this. Oh, well, here's the proof text. What you need is moderate holiness. Let's all applaud mediocrity. Don't be very good and don't be very bad. Just be medium. Have you ever talked to anybody like that? Sometimes you'll talk to somebody about their walk with the Lord, and you'll say to them, well, do you know God? And what do they say? Well, I'm not as bad as a lot of people I know, and I'm surely not as good as a lot of other people I know. I guess I'm sort of medium. And this is the basic posture of those who say, when asked if they know where they'll spend eternity, they'll say, well, I'm not as good as some, but I'm not as bad as most. I'm hoping that is going to be good enough to get me into heaven. I'll tell you what. Medium won't get you into heaven. It won't. Medium will send you straight to hell. You see, you can be medium and you can get there just as fast as being totally evil and wicked. Because it's not saying just be partially good, don't be totally bad. What Solomon is saying here is this, and in the Hebrew language it's reflexive. He's saying, whatever you do, don't go around bragging how good you are, and don't go around bragging about how humble you are. Don't be filled with righteousness that's self-centered. Don't be wise in your own eyes. Don't be going around telling everyone how good you are. And on the other hand, don't go around bragging about how bad you are. The fact is, this verse is not cautioning us against being too righteous. It's warning us against righteous rhetoric that is not backed up by righteous living. In other words, say what you are, but also live out what you are. If you're going to be a Christian and you say all those Christian things and you seem to do that, then you live out what you're saying is true. Solomon's made it clear in verse 20 that there aren't any righteous people, so he can't be talking here about righteousness. He's speaking out against self-righteousness of the hypocrites and the false wisdom of the proud. And in both cases, these sins lead to destruction. The way to avoid the ditch of self-righteousness and false humility, he says, is to stay in the middle of the road. As in verse 18, he says, it is good to grasp the one and not let go of the other. The man who fears God will avoid all extremes. Now, the question is, how do you keep from coming off self-righteous? Let me ask you, have you ever been around a self-righteous person? You know, churches are full of them, I'm afraid. I mean, you can see it dripping off of them when they walk up to you, can't you? They may even have that little church voice. You know, that sort of pious-sounding voice? Have you noticed that? He's saying, don't get caught up in self-righteousness. And don't be walking around bad-mouthing yourself all the time. What you need is you need to walk in the fear of the Lord. That's what Solomon is saying. And that fear is that sense of reverence and awe as to who he is. Stay off each of the extremes and stay on the centre of the road. Fear God, understand him, be in awe of him, and walk with him. And he says, you better grab hold of that one. Grasp that with both your hands. So we thank God for the perspective of wisdom. Second major point is this. Thank God for the power of wisdom. Thank God for the power of wisdom. And someone's going to talk to us here about how wisdom, while it doesn't solve everything and it doesn't give you the answers to all your questions that you want answers to, wisdom, first of all, does give you the perspective on life as we've learned. It helps you understand providence and helps you understand prosperity, helps you figure out some of the puzzles, or at least to understand what they're all about. But now, Solomon is going to teach us that wisdom also has a power resident in it. Solomon notes 4 different areas of life which wisdom can provide power. And the first is this. Wisdom to deal with the problems we encounter. Wisdom to deal with the problems we encounter. And he says this in verse 20, verses 19 to 20, in fact. He says, wisdom makes one wise man more powerful than 10 rulers in a city. There is not a righteous man on earth who does what is right and never sins. He says, the wise person fears the Lord so much that he has power. He is fearing the Lord so much that he doesn't fear man at all. That's a kind of power that you need. He walks with the Lord. He's confident that he's going to be all right. He faces the sinfulness of humanity and the problem of his own sin. He finds the answers in his God because that is where his fear and reverence is centered. He is strengthened by his wisdom and he becomes more powerful than, notice, 10 rulers of the city. He faces problems with confidence because he knows his God. He is in relationship with God, who is all wise. What is it the Old Testament says? They that know their God shall do exploits, will do great things. When you know God, you can be strong, not worried what other people are saying. Do you remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the book of Daniel? When they were told they would be thrown into the fiery furnace if they didn't worship the king's statue, they shrugged and they said in Daniel 3:16-18, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, and I just love this answer, by the way. It's fantastic. Listen to the words of faith here. O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. What a great words of faith that is. And they basically say, we serve a great God. We really do. And if he wants to deliver us, fantastic, great, fine. But if he doesn't, that's fine. That's okay. He's our God and we trust him, and we're not afraid of you, Nebuchadnezzar. That's what they're saying. You see, when you know God, you can be strong. Not in yourself, but you can be strong in him. You can be confident, not a self-arrogant confidence, but you're confident in the God of all glory. You can have the wisdom to deal with the problems that you encounter. Secondly, wisdom to deal with the people we employ. Wisdom to deal with the people we employ. Now, here's one that every one of us will get into in verses 21 to 22. Do not pay attention to every word people say, or you may hear your servant cursing you. For you know in your heart that many times you yourself have cursed others. Now, this is just sort of this is a great, just everyday kind of good to use wisdom, this is. All of us can take a dose of this, including the pastor. Maybe especially the pastor. Don't get concerned about what people say about you. That's what he's saying here. Listen to what Solomon is saying. He's saying, don't pay attention to the gossip of the day because you know in your own heart that you've sometimes said things that would not be acceptable to others as well. That's what he says. That's what he says, for you know in your heart that many times you yourself have cursed others. One man said, I never worry about people who say evil things about me because I know a lot more stuff about me than they do, and it's worse than what they're saying. And that's true, isn't it? And someone says, look, let's be honest here. If we get upset when people talk about us, we're holding them to a higher standard than we hold ourselves to because we are prone to do exactly the same thing. Just when you feel upset when someone is talking about you, you're talking about them. So Solomon says, wisdom to deal with the problems we encounter. Wisdom to deal with the people we employ. Here's the third one. Wisdom to deal with the perplexities we experience. Wisdom to deal with the perplexities we experience. He says in verses 23 to 25, all this I tested by wisdom, and I said, I am determined to be wise, but this was beyond me. Whatever wisdom may be, it is far off and most profound. Who can discover it? So I turned my mind to understand, to investigate, and to search out wisdom and the scheme of things, and to understand the stupidity of wickedness and the madness of folly. So Solomon says, look, I can't understand all of these things. There's a whole book full of stuff here that he says he doesn't understand, and we've been looking at that over the weeks. But he's okay with that because he understands his God. And his God is in charge of all understanding. It's like that phrase that many of us know. I don't know about the future, but I do know who holds the future. I know him. And Solomon says, and he's telling us, don't get obsessed. Don't get sort of stressed out with these things that you can't understand, because if you keep trying to do that, it will just drive yourself crazy. There's so much about this world and this life that we just can't comprehend. But the one thing we do know is that God is good. Do you remember that little trilogy that I've been saying over the last few weeks? God's plan is good, his purpose is clear, but his program is mysterious. And I'm going to live in the first two, and I'm going to let him deal with the third one. I love his plan and I love his purpose, but man, at times I don't understand what he's up to. But that's okay. That's all right, because he's God and I'm not. So wisdom to deal with the problems we encounter and the people we employ and the perplexities we experience. Now, number 4, wisdom to deal with the pitfalls we escape. Wisdom to deal with the pitfalls we escape. And notice verses 26 to 29, and it almost seems, I don't know when I read this to you earlier on, but you may have felt that this is out of place. This just doesn't seem to fit in with the rest of the passage here. It almost seems it's out of place in this chapter, but it's not. Let me read it. I find more bitter than death the woman who is a snare, whose heart is a trap, and whose hands are chains. The man who pleases God will escape her, but the sinner she will ensnare. Look, says the teacher, this is what I have discovered. Adding one thing to another to discover the schemes of things, while I was still searching but not finding, I found one upright man among 1,000, but not one upright woman among them all. This only have I found. God made mankind upright, but men have gone in search of many schemes. Now, Solomon ends this chapter on really a strange note, but especially you men now, listen up. If you've tuned out, men, tune back in, because this is especially to us. Women you can listen to, because you have this temptation too, but specifically to men, listen, because he's talking about the power of wisdom to keep us out of illicit relationships. His wisdom will keep you from falling into the pit of being snared into an illicit relationship. Let me put it in the NLT. It puts it much clearer. Listen to the NLT. It says it like this. He says, I discovered that a seductive woman is more bitter than death. Her passion is a trap, and her soft hands will bind you. Those who please God will escape from her, but sinners will be caught in her snare. Wisdom will keep you out of an affair. That's what he's saying here. One writer who wrote on Ecclesiastes, he wrote this, and he says, Solomon was trapped by sexual seductions. He went looking for love. And many a man or woman can echo those words. What he's saying. He says he went looking for love and thought he would find it in a relationship with a woman. He went looking for that which would support him, strengthen him, and make him feel life was worth the living. What he found was nothing but a fleeting sexual thrill. He found himself involved with a woman who did not give him what he was looking for at all. He still felt the same empty loneliness as before. Solomon says, be wise men. Don't get caught up in the idea that the grass is greener on the other side. Don't get caught up and think that you can find meaning and happiness and fulfillment in all that you've been looking for in some woman who is not your wife. You know, sometimes a guy will say to me, but what if I married the wrong woman? And you know what my answer is? My answer is always the same. If you're married, you married the right woman. And you need to get that thought in your mind and any other thoughts out of your mind. You see, you better honour that woman that you're married to. You don't let the devil get you caught up in the idea that you can find something better somewhere else. You cannot. Because it never really happens that way. And you know what? It comes with a bitter, bitter price. There's a Christian author and a pastor by the name of Charles Swindoll. Some of you may well have heard of him. He writes many books, very helpful books. But he writes these words. Now, these are a little deep, but I think they're helpful. And please listen carefully, because I think they're very insightful here. Listen to what he writes. He says this. The affair is a myth. It's an empty mirage. Outside of marriage, intimacy arrests the mutual process of discovery. The beauty of marriage is that there is one man with one woman committed together so that there is mutual discovery of one another and of life. And the beautiful part of that is that the intimate relations interwoven through the fabric of that marriage are forever. Let that be broken by an outside relationship, and not only is there confusion on the part of the two outside the marriage, but a deep confusion is now added to those who are bound in the marriage. And the mutual discovery, which is such an integral part of marriage, is lost. And that's what happens. When an affair happens, that's what happens in a marriage. And you look back, and some of you, and I'm not picking on anybody here this morning, you may have had these difficult times in your life, and maybe you've been through divorce, and you come to church here, and you know we love you, and you know we serve you, and we don't think you're any different than the rest of us. Except if we could sit down over a cup of coffee and talk about what it's like, and you would tell your story. And your story will be full of God's grace in helping you through this, giving you another chance. But it would also be filled with the sorrow that goes almost to the point, past the point of sorrow, of death of a relationship that once was and is now no more. And Solomon is saying, he's saying to all of us who are married here this morning, don't let anyone steal your marriage away from you. And if you're married, please know that what you have with your partner is special. And you need to step back, and you need to look at it, and you need to work at it, and you need to give thanks to God for it. To put it plainly, wisdom gives us the power to resist sexual immorality. And now you can see why that end of that chapter, which seemed perhaps out of whack with the rest of the chapter, fits in very clearly. It's all about wisdom. And you know, when we read these things about wisdom in the Old Testament, the New Testament says some things about wisdom too. And in Colossians 2, it says that in Jesus Christ are all the treasures of the wisdom of God. Paul writes this to the church in his letter, and he says this about Jesus in Colossians 2, verses 2 to 3. He says, my goal is that that is the church, that is Christians, that is believers. My goal is that they will be encouraged and knit together by strong ties of love. I want them to have full confidence because they have complete understanding of God's secret plan, which is Christ himself. In him lie hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. You know, when you're facing all of these issues and you don't know what to do, you accept the fact that you're finite, that you're human. We all are. We don't have the capacity to understand all these things. We don't have the capacity to understand Almighty God. But you know what? If you're a Christian, you know Jesus Christ. He's the wisdom of God. And he put his Holy Spirit in you. And when we accept Jesus Christ, we get Jesus Christ, and his Spirit comes to live within us. And he's the one who is the discerner in our lives. You say, well, do you have absolute wisdom? No, but I will be bold enough to tell you that I've got more wisdom than someone who doesn't know Jesus Christ, because I've got Jesus. And I wouldn't know how to get through life, as messed up as it is today, if I didn't have Jesus Christ living in my heart. I know that I can go to him at any time, and he will help me to sort things out. He will give me the truth that there is. He will give me just enough truth for each day. He gives me just enough for one day at a time. And for those of us who know Jesus Christ, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So I want to tell you that one of the things that I learn about life as I read the book of Ecclesiastes is that you don't want to go through life under the sun, which means without God. You want to go through life with the Son. S-O-N. Jesus Christ. And if you've never trusted Jesus Christ as your Saviour, I want to urge you today to take that step. You think life can't get any better? Oh man, it can get a whole lot better when Jesus is in your life. Jesus said that he came to give abundant life. Life to the full, life with meaning and significance. And you can start that relationship with him, and as soon as you do, he starts to live in your heart and in your life, and all wisdom comes from him. We're going to stop and we're going to pray. I'm going to give you the opportunity maybe to reflect on these things. Let's bow our heads as we pray. Maybe you're someone here this morning and you're just checking out a Christian faith, you're not sure, you're Maybe you've been coming for a while, or maybe you haven't. This is your first time here, wherever you are. You recognise that actually you're discovering that life is meaningless, or struggling to understand life and raising those big questions of life. And yet, as the Apostle Paul tells us, that in Jesus Christ lie hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. When we know God through Jesus Christ, then we can understand life. We may not understand all the intricacies of life, but we certainly understand the big perspective of life. And we have power daily to live that life. I want to encourage you quietly, maybe now, just to stop. And you may be at that stage where you say, yeah, I want to start a relationship. Then you simply invite Jesus Christ into your life. I'm not going to pray a prayer, just you quietly invite Jesus into your life. You ask for his forgiveness. You recognise that your sin put him on the cross. And that he offers you that free gift of forgiveness if you will accept it. And you simply invite him into your heart and life. And he will take care of the rest. You may be not in that position. You may still have questions. There may be still things that you're not sure about. And I just encourage you to keep coming to church. Join Christianity Explored. Do whatever it takes. Be like Solomon, who was searching for answers. Be like Solomon. And look at the truth of the gospel. Look at the truth of Christianity and search for answers. And you will find